Hello and welcome again to Sport Unlocked, the podcast giving you the lowdown on the week's sports news. Coming up, we'll analyse the BT Sports Discovery joint venture that's going to shake up British sports broadcasting. There's controversy in the NFL over whether bonuses were paid to lose games. In Barcelona, there's yet another financial investigation into the club. We're in Saudi Arabia again this week over their latest sports investment. This time it's in golf, and it really is causing divisions. The most controversial thing at the moment is the Beijing Olympics. They are underway under a human rights cloud. There's also been a escalating dispute between FIFA and the IOC at the start of the games. Plus, there's news of the sports at risk of losing their Olympic spots. There's the sport trying to join the Olympic program, padel, that's now got Qatari investment. And in America, there are new transgender rules in swimming. Plus, we'll take you through the new contracts for female players in soccer in England and the US. I'm Rob Harris from the Associated Press, and alongside me as ever is Martin Ziegler from The Times and Tarek Panja from the New York Times. So what's been catching your eye this week in the world of sport, perhaps away from the obvious headlines?
Well, there was the absolutely disgraceful incident in Germany where a pizza company named a pizza the Champignon League and provoked a warning letter from the local trademark person saying it's infringing UEFA's trademark of the Champions League.
Zeke, do you think it's one of the most sort of egregious examples of things we've seen? You know, when you go to major tournaments, we've seen fans having to turn their T-shirts inside out, things like that. These guys can be overzealous at times.
And in this case, it was probably the local agents protecting UEFA's intellectual property spotting a bit of a payday, I'm guessing, because if they're told to watch out for infringements, they go and shop them, and perhaps not realising then the magnitude that suddenly explodes not into just a German story, but all far and wide, that it looks like UEFA are trying to stop some place having a Champions League pizza.
It does make you want to have a pizza.
It did actually. When I saw champignon, I thought, oh, I could just fancy one of those champignon pizza. Anyway, UEFA sort of very quickly put out a statement saying that the overzealous local agents are acting too hastily, and it said clearly some people are making a meal out of this story, which I think was written by a fun guy in Neon. That's a joke, by the way. You can laugh.
That attempted UEFA humour. But we have seen it, even at the African Cup of Nations, journalists saying that the labels have been taken off the bottles of water. I remember when I was in a press conference with Tarek in Rwanda, in Kigali, after a FIFA meeting, that someone came round as well, taking those labels off the bottles.
Midway through drinking the bottle as well, snatched it out of my hand. Rob, there was another bizarre incident this week, wasn't there, in one of the World Cup qualifiers? Well, not bizarre, it was just unfortunate that these games were played at Arctic conditions in the US. What happened there?
This is an absolute farce, and the US playing their World Cup qualifiers have the right to choose their venue, and the visit of Honduras, where did they choose? Not perhaps the sunnier winter climes of California or Florida, but Minnesota in minus 15 degrees Celsius. And it's utterly reckless, the fact that no one intervened at FIFA or CONCACAF to demand a change of venue, and they had to get a bit of extra clothing on, didn't they?
I mean, yes, I mean, the goalkeeper was pictured wearing a snood, which I was kind of half expecting FIFA to announce disciplinary measures because it's snoods are actually banned under safety grounds. But it ended up, as you say, people getting to hospital. I mean, it's not just FIFA and CONCACAF who need to step in. I mean, why can't somebody on the ground take a sort of sensible decision and say this is...
The Americans have got previous for this. Whenever they've played Mexico, they've found like the most inhospitable location, freezing weather. And also, this is kind of an odd date as well, isn't it? This is an extra date FIFA have had to add because of the pandemic. These games aren't normally played in January, so you don't get to minus 15 or whatever this thing was. So it's a one-off. But someone should step in, surely. That sort of advantage is bizarre. Also, it can't help US players either. Most of them aren't playing. They're playing in Europe and elsewhere. They're not playing in conditions like that. It's not good for anyone.
It's not good when Honduras players end up with hypothermia, others on an intravenous drip after the game. particularly when it's something that was so avoidable as well, just choosing a more hospitable climate. And remember, this is the 2026 World Cup host nation as well. They're meant to be acting responsibly. Of course, these were the extra World Cup dates slotted in to try to cram in the fixtures delayed by the pandemic. The US beating Honduras 3-0. So maybe their chances of not missing out on a second World Cup in a row have been helped by that. Getting closer as we are to the draw in Qatar. Of course, one of the regions not playing was Europe this week, which meant a rare weekend where we didn't have the major top flight leagues in England, Germany, Italy playing, and neither were their national teams playing at all as well. So a really big opportunity for the lower leagues in the men's football, but I didn't see it being seized on at all, particularly in England, where we've got the EFL running the 3 leagues below the Premier League. They've spent a lot of time recently complaining about the distribution of cash, the disparities between the leagues, and they did nothing to try to take advantage to attract more fans in any way to the games, in a way that we've seen, say, the FA running women's football weekends in the past in attempt to sort of bring new audiences in. A completely missed opportunity by the likes of the EFL.
Well, and to make matters worse, Rob, the EFL actually had to put a statement out at the weekend following what they said was multiple incidents of inappropriate and reckless crowd behaviour on Saturday at EFL matches. So, yeah, not only were they not promoting it, it looks like an opportunity for troublemakers.
Martin, I think you wrote a piece recently that there's an increase in crowd trouble, or somewhere in the British press I saw, fueled by cocaine. There is a rise in fan behaviour issues in the UK.
Yeah, the head of the football police unit has said there's been a significant rise in recent seasons. I mean, obviously not taking into account last season when there was nobody there, but this season and the season before, when things are getting worse. I think Jeremy Wilson, the Daily Telegraph, did a thing around the fact that cocaine is a factor in this, which I know we think is the case from the Euro 2020 final as well. So yeah, it's English football has got challenges on that front, definitely.
French football as well this season, with players being confronted on the pitch. And there is always the issue in English football that because of the high profile nature of it, because so much of the world's media is based in England, that actually there can be disproportionate attention and higher profile elements of the coverage when there are instances compared with, say, South America or other parts of the world. But I suppose that's the price you pay if you want to be so popular in the dominant football country in the world as England will often see itself, particularly through the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely true, Rob. And interesting developments this week on the sports broadcasting front, involving some of the biggest names in global TV: Discovery, DAZN, and BT Sport.
Yes, DAZN, who we thought might be coming in to take over BT Sport entirely, have lost out to Discovery. Of course, Discovery, the owners of Eurosport, they're now going into a 50-50 joint partnership, which should go through, they're saying, this quarter. And it really does help to secure the future of BT, who, on their sports side, who do show the Premier League and Champions League in particular in the UK.
The zone certainly briefed aggressively enough that they seem to have it. It's an interesting deal, this. The numbers haven't been released, but the reporting has been around the $800 million mark. And the what Discovery are bringing to the table is not just money. I think there's a bunch of assets they have, Eurosport being one. And Martin, you wrote in a piece for the Times that there's been a merger in the US which might have fueled some of this.
Yeah, Warner Media, which and own HBO, they're going to merge as well with Discovery. So you're going to have this huge sort of entertainment, vast global entertainment business linking up with BT Sport. And I think certainly in the UK there'll be a sort of a new brand combining everything. So if you're a BT Sport subscriber, you get your BT stuff and you get your Discovery Plus, Eurosport, sport and entertainment. So it's an interesting one. Where, I mean, some people thought this is going to be, is this going to be a challenge to Sky's Premier League dominance? Which I don't think so, because they also announced a carriage deal with Sky and up until beyond 2030. So it's almost as though they are accepting there's going to be two big hitters in this marketplace.
In that, Sky obviously are the dominant pay TV platform in the UK through the satellite and increasingly through broadband too, delivering things through Now TV. That's interesting about the brand, because we're now in a period with Discovery showing the Olympics, and they're showing it on linear, on Eurosport, and digitally on the Discovery Plus app. You've already got these different brands for people to get their heads around, being the part of the same group. And if you think about BT, well, not only do they have BT Sport as channels, they've still got BT Sport ESPN as one of the channels too, because when BT Sport came into existence a decade ago, well, they took over the UK broadcasting side of ESPN. So on top of this, now you're saying they're going to have to find a new brand, or one that interlinks the existing brands to try to create one. I assume it won't be BT, Eurosport, Discovery, ESPN.
No, but I think, Rob, guys, people are just going to be attracted to whatever rights that these properties. If you want to watch football, you don't really care what the name on the box is, or whatever sport you're into. Martin, at the moment, Sky is the dominant player in terms of the number of games it has. And again, I read in your piece that maybe you said definitely not collusion, but there's going to be some restraint. But if I'm this new player and I'm relatively wealthy, given the size of the company behind me, Discovery, BT, everyone else, would I be happy with just one or two packages of Premier League football, or would I want to have half or more than Sky?
I think if you have Champions League football, you're probably happy with what you've got, as long as you've got some of it. Because I think the attraction there is you don't have to pay as much as you have to pay for like domestic Premier League rights, and also if you're more of a sort of perhaps an outward-facing global company, then I think that's you're probably not as bothered about that. DAZN, though, Tarek, I understand they came back with a really high offer. They were desperate to get these rights. Came back with a really high offer just before the board meeting on Wednesday, and we're not back. There are quite a few problems around it. There'd be conflicting rights holders if they'd got BT Sport. But where does this leave them? Because they lost $2 billion in 2019. They've had real problems in Italy with Serie A, some of the technical coverage.
They've increased subs by 50% as well in the last couple of weeks. Martin, and the accounts are a month delayed, so we don't know how big those losses are now. We the zone as a business. What is the strategy there? It's a cash burning business. The route out of that mess, which what I see as a mess, people say is an IPO. But who would want to underwrite an IPO of a business that is just burning through cash, and there isn't any kind of pathway that I can see that makes sense? Next few months will be interesting.
I mean, they have focused on boxing in particular in the UK, whereas in other countries they are more in with things like Premier League rights in the likes of Canada. But it doesn't appear they're on the path to profitability at all.
No, and just speaking of rights, you mentioned BT with the Champions League. UEFA next week are going to announce that their tender, the first tender in 20 years, is now finished. And this came from pressure from the clubs, because UEFA just kept rolling over with their marketing partner, Team Marketing. And the club said, well, maybe there's some money left on the table. There was a beauty parade for the last couple of months. Guess what? Team Marketing ended up with almost all of the rights again. And but there is a new partner. Relevant Sports in the United States have promised about $250 million a year, $100 million more than UEFA currently gets. And we move on from there. What do you guys reckon?
Is Relevant Sports, that's just for the American rights that they're selling, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Just in the US.
Yeah.
And that's really predicting a significant uplift, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 150 million currently in the US, so that's 100 million. But we've seen, like with the Premier League rights in the US, and we've seen with the Premier League rights in the US and with La Liga, that is a market that's really buoyant.
Even though the games US time for Champions League are during the afternoon, so you're really having to attract people away from work and ideally effectively streaming from wherever they're doing their jobs. Internationally, for the rights that team hold? Well, it's obviously we're getting these rights for the new era of the Champions League with a lot more games, with a bigger group stage and the Swiss model as well. So they have got more to sell.
Yeah, it feels like they've laid the groundwork for this joint venture that has been existed and sort of in a mothball status with the ECA. It's this company called UCCSA, UEFA Club Competitions SA, and it's kind of this joint venture with the clubs. There is a thought that in 9 months that's going to be tooled up as a company and set up properly, and the next cycle, 27-30 and beyond, that's when we're going to see big changes. So, the era of these team marketing type deals might be coming to an end.
And of course, the Relevant Sports is owned by Stephen Ross, who also owns the Miami Dolphins. But we know them in the world of football because actually they're involved in the International Champions Cup, the pre-season tour. And we've often seen Ross switching from Infantino to Sheffield and sort of in different camps at different times in terms of whether they get into bed together to run events and tournaments.
Yeah, they're really embedded with UEFA right now, but not even 2015. Relevant tried their own Super League breakaway with the clubs that we saw attempt to break away recently. That can't have. Since then, they've got very close to UEFA. There's there's staff, in fact, that have moved from Relevant to Alexander Severin's office, and they're still in talks about having UEFA put their name to the ICC or a summer tournament.
And still potentially a Champions League final being staged in the US as well, something that Sheffield has talked about since the early days of his presidency.
Talking of Stephen Ross, he's been caught up in this class action lawsuit brought against the NFL by Brian Flores, alleging racist hiring practices.
Brian Flores seeking head coaches' jobs in the NFL, alleged racist hiring practices over his interviews with the Houston Texans and the New Orleans Saints, and all relating to the Rooney Rule and the application of that. But also within the lawsuit, he actually alleges that Stephen Ross, as the Dolphins owner, told him he would pay him $100,000 every time he lost in his first season as Dolphins coach. He wanted to tank the season to get a top draft pick. What it also said is the fact that apparently Flores refusing to sign a quarterback breaching the tampering rules. When he refused, he was cast as what he says is an angry black man who's difficult to work with, and then was fired.
Well, that doesn't sound good at all.
Yeah, and Ross is calling these allegations false, malicious, and defamatory, and says he's going to act to defend his personal integrity, but really is damaging for the NFL as they build up to the Super Bowl next week between the LA Rams and the Cincinnati Bengals. The Rams, of course, owned by the Arsenal owner, Stan Kroenke. And also this week, we've had one of the biggest names in NFL announcing his retirement with Tom Brady. Interesting the way it first was reported out on Saturday afternoon by two well-sourced ESPN reporters. We then had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers saying they didn't know about this, they hadn't been informed. Lots of people starting to cast doubt on the journalism. Then it was all confirmed on Tuesday, and it showed they had it nailed on.
Great story, yeah. Great scoop for those
Yeah,
guys.
a great victory for journalists.
Big praise for the Glazers from Tom Brady. We're not used to hearing that in the world of sport.
Probably because they paid him a bucket load of money. Guys, more bad blood as well. More in this soap opera that is Barcelona. Rob, you talked about this case involving Steve Ross in the States, but we had the president of Barcelona, Joan Laporta, in taking part in the most extraordinary press conference earlier this week, in which he says he's passed a dossier to the public prosecutor's office in Catalonia, saying there may have been definitely negligence, saying there may have been fraud under the former president, his predecessor, Josep Maria Bartomeu. Of course, Barcelona have got that massive debt, more than 1.3 billion euros, hundreds of millions of euros, he said, was spent in a fashion that didn't really make sense. But again, some people say, well, of course he would say that because Barcelona is a very political club and he's the new guy and he's going to cast the last guy as someone who has run the club into the ground. This thing, every week there seems to be another crazy story involving Barcelona.
The priority seems to be laying the blame at the door of the previous president for any of the financial issues to ensure that he isn't deemed responsible perhaps for failing to win trophies, because they're trying to rebuild the squad after being sort of hampered by things like the salary cap from La Liga, which obviously meant Messi left, and they're scrambling to get rid of players just to register new ones.
Yeah, I think that, the trouble they've got is that the stardust is gone to a large extent. I mean, there's rumours in the marketing world that they're going to do a new sponsorship deal with Kazoo, which is the sort of car trading website, which is sort of, it's a bit down market compared to what they're used to, and I think the price reflects that as well. So I think that's the issue Laporta's facing, is that things have changed a lot.
Very quickly as well. Like you couldn't imagine having this conversation a couple of years ago when you have all these stars, the team is performing extremely well. It's amazing how quickly the reputation of that club has been damaged over the past year, just scandal after scandal, and then this financial crunch in which we're still trying to figure out how they're signing players that they are signing. There's just a lot of kind of doubt about that club where there wasn't before. There was only excellence.
Barcelona had been banking on joining the Super League, something that they are still, of course, behind with Real Madrid and Juventus. They're still battling through the courts, and we see increasingly why they wanted that cash windfall to cover for their own predicaments. But the concept of Super Leagues and breakaways isn't just one for football. Golf has taken inspiration too. And of course, just like we've seen in football so often, Saudi cash. And it really is splitting the world of golf, isn't it? What exactly is involved with this international series that they're planning?
Well, money, I think, is the main thing that's involved in it, as far as I can make out. I mean, just incredible sums of money that are being offered. It's just mind-boggling. If you think footballers are highly paid, just look at some of the sums that are being offered to these golfers.
And Martin, go on. What are those sums? Give us an idea for those of us who aren't sort of keen followers or followers of golf.
The sort of money we're talking about is at the very top. For example, there's been a report that Bryson DeChambeau has been offered £100 million to be the sort of the face of the new Saudi golf competition, the new Saudi Golf League. I mean, that's just one person. I mean, that's like the sort of wage bill for a sort of middle to low ranking Premier League football club.
How would this work as well? Does anyone know what this new breakaway event is? Is it played around the world, or is it mainly in Saudi Arabia, or what is it they want to do?
Well, they're talking about it being benefiting golf in Saudi Arabia, but then holding events in England.
Yeah, it's really unsettling for the marketplace where you have an entrant. It's good for these golfers and their bank balances, presumably, right? But for the sport, you have an entrant or any business that doesn't really have to make any money. They can kind of lose huge amounts of money. And for the time being, for those golfers, you can see why it'd be attractive. But for the sport, I'm not so sure whether it's a good thing.
And it is the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia who are behind this, who also own Newcastle, fresh from hosting the club in Jeddah during the winter break. We've got the likes of Phil Mickelson, though, who have turned their fire on the PGA Tour. He's accused them of obnoxious greed because of the way they protect their ownership rights, and saying this is exactly why golfers like him are being tempted by the rivals from Saudi Arabia.
Well, there is a Newcastle link here, isn't there? The chairman of Newcastle, Yasser Al Rumayyan, also the leader of PIF, is a huge golf fan. It's what he loves doing in his spare time. Sometimes you have these examples of, I like this so much, I'm going to buy it, and this sort of smacks of that. Martin, is he also the chief executive of Saudi Golf or something like that?
Yeah, he's the president of Saudi Golf and the Asian Golf Federation. And actually, the chief executive of Saudi Golf and the new Secretary General of the Asian Golf Federation, Majed Al Saror, is likely to become a Newcastle director. I think is just going through the process. I think I might have mentioned that last week.
You did. Maybe that deal will be sealed on the golf course.
This really does threaten to create fractures and divides within the golf world, and obviously it's normally so staid between some of the institutions like the R&A, but they really have been suddenly shaken up by this. And the players seeming that they've got a chance to regain some control. With Mickelson's talking about the cost of showing clips of perhaps him hitting a shot at the Masters costing $30,000 per second, and it could cost millions to use. And the Saudis tempting the players by saying, you come on board and we'll let you post your own clips on social media and things like that. And obviously, as players in any sport, athletes become big brands in their own right, they want to retain some of their IP, the right to show them playing golf in this case, perhaps goals in other circumstances where that can't happen, say, in football, where you can't post your own goal.
Well, again, it speaks to the business model. If you don't need to make any money from a project, you can offer everything to the players, because it's not apples and apples. Some of these other events have to balance their books. This Saudi project probably is one to enhance Saudi Arabia's reputation and to attract sports to that country, and they don't care how much money they lose. Rob, just pivoting to another sport quickly with Saudi, another big announcement this week. You can't move for Saudi sports announcements. The Formula One team Aston Martin has signed a very lucrative deal with Aramco, the oil company of Saudi Arabia. I was told it's bigger than any football shirt sponsorship. So you're talking close to $100 million more than that per season if it's those levels. And that's for the Aston Martin team, its livery and some work in terms of the engine. Huge amounts of money, or again, coming from Saudi Arabia.
And of course, they're not one of the leading teams either. They're not a team in contention for the F1 titles, and they're attracting that sort of investment.
Yeah, exactly. They're a former Force India team that collapsed into Racing Point, and then Aston Martin, run by Canadian billionaire Lawrence Stroll, middle pack team. And Saudi Arabia got a Grand Prix last season and want to plant their flag on this sport as well.
Well, there will be no Shanghai Grand Prix again in 2022. Still the pandemic restrictions in China preventing the Formula One show moving there for the race. But of course, the Olympics is going ahead in Beijing at the moment. The Winter Games there, and not a games where many foreign dignitaries have chosen to go to. Diplomatic boycotts from the likes of Britain, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. But they will be getting the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman dropping in.
Well, I think there's a sort of a race for see which of the despots can reach Beijing quick enough. And yeah, we had Mohammed bin Salman getting there, Vladimir Putin. But yeah, I mean, because of the human rights abuses in China, the Uyghurs being put into detention camps in their hundreds of thousands, the sort of crackdown on freedoms in Hong Kong. Countries such as Britain and the USA are not sending dignitaries, even though their teams are attending.
I mean, so often, particularly in the build-up to these games, we've heard people making sweeping statements to human rights abuses by China, or the sort of whataboutery in the sense of, well, every country's got problems. And it's probably because there hasn't been much of a visualization of just what China is doing. And in fact, we have seen things like images of Uyghur inmates in detention centers in the Xinjiang region. These absolutely abuses that are clear to be seen.
Stories are arresting, and some of them are really shocking. There's a piece by one of your colleagues, actually, Rob, this week, really caught my eye. There was a flag bearer or a torch, someone who ran the torch relay, that's right, head of the Beijing Olympics in 2008. And he was a guy from Xinjiang. He's now living in exile in the United States, in Boston, and hasn't seen or heard from his family, his father, for 5 years. And that just shows you where China is now in 2022 from when they said it was going to be in 2008. They said by awarding the games to China, it brings that country into the community of the world, and human rights will actually improve. And in fact, on any metric you want to measure, it's got worse.
And in the press conference that Thomas Bach, the IOC president, held, it was typically deflecting of any concerns about China, absolutely claiming them to be apolitical, whereas actually by taking the event to China actually makes them political because they are endorsing the regime. They're allowing this huge celebration of China and what, of course, is called sports washing. And something that struck me about perhaps sports washing in action without being too trivial, which is we're seeing a lot of images from Beijing around the media center in particular of the robots delivering food and this sort of soft image of like how great Chinese technology is, of how the robots from the ceiling can deliver the food. And that's exactly what China wants. They want people to be sharing those sorts of images, a different sort of image of China by staging these Olympics.
Yeah, delivering food, shaking a cocktail, and making hamburgers and serving ice creams, and you know, you're only human. It is kind of weirdly fascinating to watch these robots. And you know, there were also in terms of the politics. Rob, you mentioned there's no sport and politics. Even the choice of some of the people running the relay, the pre-games relay, there was a soldier that was given the torch, and he was given that because he fought for the Chinese military in a recent skirmish with India, and that led to India diplomatically boycotting these games. So these games are perhaps the most political games since 1980 in the Moscow Olympics.
And we can now hear from the IOC president, Thomas Bach, who says that they're not getting involved with politics, but of course that does lead to the point raised by human rights activists. Well, that does lead to the likes of Peter Irwin from the Uyghur Project saying genocide is not a political dispute. Nice try, though. Let's hear from Thomas Bach.
The Uyghur population. There, again, the position of the IOC must be, given the political neutrality, that we are not commenting on political issues, because otherwise, you know, if we are taking a political standpoint and we are getting in the middle of tensions and dispute and confrontations of political powers, then we are putting the games at risk. If at the end you would have Olympic Games only between national Olympic committees whose governments agree on every political situation, the games would lose their universality, and with the universality they would lose their mission, and that would lead to the end of the Olympic Games. You know, the mission, if we cannot accomplish our mission to bringing the world together, then we are at great risk.
Somebody who you know, was at the vote in 2001 for the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing, and everything there was about, you know, this is going to be some sort of perestroika. China's going to open up, and it's just gone backwards and backwards and backwards since 2008, and now it's really bad. I'm just intrigued as what's going to happen, because FIFA is desperate to give China the World Cup. Probably not 2030, but almost certainly 2034. And they will just roll over and do it, and they just probably won't seem to care whether their human rights things is still going to be an issue there, because they're so keen to give this huge market the opportunity to hold the World Cup. They'll take it there, whatever, I guess. But on the other hand, Gianni Infantino hasn't gone to Beijing. I think that's right.
Yeah, and the IOC president, Thomas Bach, saying that he was told by Infantino only a day before the IOC session this week he wouldn't go because of the pandemic situation. He would not travel, the words of Thomas Bach. And perhaps Gianni Infantino has been one of the most travelled people during the pandemic. For instance, a year ago, he was all over Africa on the campaign trail, it looked like, as Patrice Motsepe was running his election. And just now he's actually in Cameroon as well at the African Cup of Nations, and he's been travelling all around throughout the pandemic, more than any of the sort of national leaders. So perhaps it gave the impression, at least, he didn't want to be in Beijing.
Rob, it felt like an enormous swerve, because had he been in that room in Beijing, he would have had speaker after speaker panning this idea for a biennial World Cup.
Yeah, we had a statement from the IOC effectively threatening that they would um, look at football's future in the Olympics if they pressed ahead with this. Because, I mean, in IOC language, it was fairly bland, but it was in relation to Los Angeles 2028, and it said under the headline football that they will continue to monitor the evolution of the international football calendar, i.e., hold the World Cup every 2 years and you can forget about being part of the Olympics.
And it's rare the IOC call anyone out, take on any significant figures in sport. We saw that with the Russian doping scandal, how reticent they were for any intervention. Yet they're taking on FIFA. So it actually looks politically calculated, the fact that they're choosing FIFA as their target in this case.
Yeah, 100%, Rob. I think a biennial World Cup hits a lot of these sports, particularly those that have their tournaments in the summer. The last time I remember kind of a roasting like this was in Rio, 2016 Olympics, the IOC session, and they went after WADA president Craig Reedy. He got an absolute hammering over saying Russia should be punished more severely than the IOC was prepared to, and he quickly left. I think with his tail between between his legs, and you didn't see Craig Reedy talk about punishing Russia in the same way after that period. I don't think.
The other interesting thing about the LA 2028 is that boxing, weightlifting, and modern pentathlon have not been included in the initial list of sports. Boxing, I mean, weightlifting, obviously, loads of issues around doping. Modern pentathlon, they haven't even decided what's going to replace the horse events. So you can understand with them. But boxing had this issue with it turned out that independent inquiry found that the Rio events had been manipulated by the officials. So, what do you think? Do you think boxing is will it be able to get back in? Do you think?
Yeah, I think boxing is going to be in the Olympic Games, whether or not AIBA, the governing body, can ever be rehabilitated is the other question. I think boxing will be there, but there is this issue of the number of athletes that an Olympics can have, in the athletes' village, etc. So when you're adding sports, you do need to remove some. And if you look at the ones that have been under pressure, they're those traditional ones. You've seen weightlifting because of the scandals there, boxing because of scandals there. And there was a massive campaign, Martin, when we were in Buenos Aires in 2013 with the move to kick wrestling out. There was that Save Wrestling campaign that just about kept that sport in the game. So there will be sports that will have to be shorn at some point.
And there's another sport that's still trying to get on the 28 program as well, padel, which is a mix between tennis and squash. And this week we've heard actually of Qatari involvement in that. PSG owner Nasser Al Khalifa, through Qatar Sports Investment, they're trying to create their own league and they're trying to get on the Olympic program for 2028. Obviously, squash for many years has been rejected from trying to get into the Olympics.
Be interesting to watch how the Qataris run that campaign. We've seen how Qataris have campaigned with sports governing bodies in the past. I wonder what tactics they'll adopt this time.
Yeah, well, they are taking on the incumbent tour, which they believe has too much dominance. The beer company Estrella Damm, they're running the World Padel Tour. So this is the attempt to use the heft of Qatar, PSG, Al Khalifa, who's a big tennis player himself. And of course, Qatar itself probably looking ahead to things like staging the 2036 Olympics, having been brushed out of the 2032 process as the Gold Coast got those games.
Jurgen Klopp likes paddle, doesn't he? That's the only thing I know about it.
Apparently, it's the second most popular sport in Spain.
After what?
Second most popular after Barcelona politics.
Yeah.
Big change in USA swimming this week. A lot of pressure over this college swimmer, Leah Thomas, who swam for the University of Pennsylvania men's team, then transitioned, went on a hormone course and for a year, and now is swimming for the women's team, breaking all sorts of records, and it provoked a sort of international sort of furore. So the International Swimming Federation has announced a review, and USA Swimming has now changed its own rules, that they're going to have a panel which is going to look and make a decision on whether, on individual cases, they've the in elite competition, whether that competitor has had an unfair advantage from going through male puberty.
We talked about this quite a bit on this podcast, and if you talk to some scientists like Ross Tucker, they would say that the advantages male advantages will remain on the body, whatever medication athletes put on, and there is that advantage. And I just think this issue will run and run.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a particularly thorny issue that sports governing bodies are going to have to tackle in the coming years, a sort of clash between morals, science, and sporting competition. Some other news to touch on this week, but both in US and English football, new contracts for women's players, improved conditions, particularly in the Women's Super League. The fact that maternity leave will now see players entitled to 14 weeks at 100% of their regular salary. And that's been announced by the Football Association. Previously, it had been at the discretion of clubs in terms of the maternity pay that was in place. And a player had to be with a club a minimum of 26 weeks to qualify. These would be part of the new licensing criteria. It's been something particularly praised by the Chelsea manager, Emma Hayes, doing a lot to try and catch up in terms of the provisions provided. And in the United States, a first ever collective bargaining agreement by the National Women's Soccer League Players Association. Amongst the provisions that they've secured a minimum salary of $35,000. That's a nearly 60% increase, and it will also see 4% annual raises. Also, various things like health insurance being provided, retirement funds, and housing contributions too.
Yeah, the quantums you mentioned there are still just much lower than the top tier of elite men's football, but at least that is a significant increase. You do wonder, though, on that sort of money, if you're going to have a career in football, what do you do afterwards? There's not going to, you don't have a nest egg for the future if you're a women's footballer today. So that's something that the game's going to have to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. We've not talked about the really big news story of the week there, have we? Your publication, Tarek, the New York Times, is fresh from purchasing The Athletic, has now gone for Wordle, the popular online word game.
Yeah, huge. Can't stop buying things at the moment once you start. And it was as the minutes to the transfer window was ticking down that this deal was announced. It was as we're waiting to see whether Aubameyang will be joining Barcelona after all, and whether those last-minute deals were done. There comes a New York Times to shock everyone with the I think the best transfer of the window. What a game this is! It's taken the world by storm. Martin, you an avid fan? Are you playing?
Yeah. No, I do it every day. I'm on an unbeaten streak since I started, so just hopefully that'll keep that going a bit. But what's going to happen? Are we going to have to pay for it in the future?
Well, hard to know what happens in the long-term future. But they said for now, whatever now means, the game will remain free for its millions of players. I guess the announcement seemed to suggest that like 10 years on, 5 years on, there may be a payment, and that's going to upset a lot of people, I think, if it does bear a charge.
Maybe we'll get the Wordle World Cup.
Yeah.
In Qatar.
In Jeddah. Well, I feel like I need to actually go and play Wordle for the first time, having completely never logged on to do so. Seeing it all over Twitter, all these green squares, but having never actually logged on. Too busy having to edit this pod.
Yeah, we do. You do an amazing job there, Rob. And
but most important is anyone to vote in the Sports Podcast Awards, which is still running. The link is on our Twitter feed, and it is a public vote you have to register for. However, sort of unscientific these things are, the fact it's done that way. But such is the way these popularity contests are run.
Rob, you've been punting this thing for months. When is this actual award going to happen? I feel like we've been talking about this every week. Are they real awards?
Well, we probably should get into some of the nuts and bolts of these awards that take place, that they are, in fact, a money-making thing for the people who organise them, and they keep them going with these awards publicly. People are talking about them. You've got sports broadcasters mentioning them, and it keeps themselves in the headlines and people going to their website. So it's not just some pure exercise in deciding which the best podcasts are, in other cases, who the best sports marketing agency is of the year. There's a business behind these awards, aren't there?
Is there a sports podcast producer of the year?
There's only one winner. You don't have those. Like you've got to stick on, Rob.
I'll stay out of this part of the conversation, and just thank you as ever, and thank you all to the listeners as well, as we reach the end of episode 54 of Sport Unlocked. Enjoy the Winter Olympics viewing and the politics.
Very good.
Yeah, and always welcome for your feedback at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But for now, thank you for listening.
Please
Goodbye.
vote.